Hi all, welcome back to the Congressional App Challenge Debugged podcast. I'm your host Medha, and today our guest is Juliana Spofford, General Counsel and Chief Privacy Officer for Aidentified, an AI-powered prospecting platform. Aidentified is a data and relationship intelligence business that uses AI and machine learning to map personal connections and support prospecting for salespeople, marketers, real estate agents, wealth managers, and others. Juliana has over 30 years of experience providing legal advice to data services and information technology companies. Juliana, thank you so much for being here. How are you doing?
I'm doing fine. It's just great to be here and to talk with you today. Thanks for inviting me.
Super excited to have you. So I would first love to understand, how did you get into this intersection between tech and law? Have you always been interested in both and decided to become a lawyer first? How did that happen?
Well, it really, in some ways, was by happenstance. It's because, I was working as a lawyer in a data services company. And because of that, we were working with a fair amount of personal information. And so because of that, I needed to understand what the privacy implications were of keeping, large amounts of personal information inside of the company's servers and or data systems and production systems. So I sort of learned on the job what that intersection was. But as I started working for data services companies back in 2006, it really became clear to me that, a working knowledge of the technology behind that data and what we were doing with it as a company was incredibly important. And because of that, I became more and more interested in the privacy-related pieces of data and how the law worked with keeping that personal information secure and how cybersecurity worked with keeping it secure as well.
That's very interesting. How did you navigate, learning about data science and artificial intelligence and all of that? How did you best prepare yourself? What were the kinds of resources you took, and what was the catalyst that prompted you to realize, I really need to understand how this technology works?
Yeah, so about 10 years ago, actually more than 10 years ago, especially when I started working for a company called Net Prospects, I was working very closely with our chief technology officer and some of our data science people to just understand how technology was working with the data so that I was able to give advice from a legal point of view as to what the company should be doing from a privacy perspective or from a security perspective. And, as a lawyer, what you do inside of a company and also outside of a company in law firms is you advise on risk. So you really need to understand that your stakeholders inside of a company are not just, the CEO or the chief revenue officer or the salesperson. It really is your technology people are your stakeholders as well. So you are advising them as to, how to stay in compliance with the various different laws that are in effect, going into effect, etc. And, I was lucky to be practicing in-house with, startups, that technology type of startups in a time where privacy and security were starting to, become real areas that the law was focusing on. And new privacy laws were being passed all of the time, and we needed to make sure we were compliant with them. So about 10 years ago, I would say I started doing a lot more to becoming more specialized really on the data privacy side, I would say. And that came about because the company that I was working for, Net Prospects, was acquired by Dun & Bradstreet, and the chief privacy officer of Dun & Bradstreet, which is a global officer, was very interested in taking me under his wing to teach me some of the data privacy knowledge that he had so that I could take over for him at some point.
That's incredible, and I love to see that you did.
I did.
That's absolutely an incredible story. I'd love to understand, I feel like, everyone talks about now that generative AI has come to the forefront of technological innovation. What are the legal, ethical privacy standpoints to that, I'd love to take a step back and understand throughout your career, right? I'm assuming there's been multiple moments like that where, you quickly had to become enabled about a new technological innovation, and then try to somehow create legal frameworks around it without there being much precedent. Can you talk us through, the most significant time that you've had that happen to you? What was that innovation, and then how did you kind of work around that process?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, just to show you what a dinosaur I actually am, the internet is one of them, because that came into effect after I started practicing law. When I was a young lawyer, I had a computer with AOL, believe it or not, on my desk. But as things started changing rapidly, we had to all keep up with all of the technology that was changing all the time because of the internet. And in fact, practicing law itself changed because of the internet, because there were so many things that we couldn't do easily without the internet. So all of the content that was on the internet, I was able to practice inside of a small startup without having to go to like a big law library all the time, because I had all of these content, data, legal content and other kinds of content at my fingertips that I could use all the time. But obviously, I had to learn how to use all that to be able to practice as well. So I would say that was the first disruptor. There have been many other disruptors that have come along, some small and some big. I would say that Gen AI is probably one of the bigger ones that we've seen. And, from the beginning, I've always talked about, making sure that we incorporate these new things into our companies and not say, okay, yeah, we can't do that, we can't touch that. There are some lawyers, I think, that are a little bit afraid of Gen AI because of some of the problems that could happen if you bring in Gen AI. And I'm sure you probably have some questions about that a little bit later, but I have always made sure that I could embrace the technology and find a way to bring it in if it's going to help us. You're only going to be a differentiator in the market if you embrace, as a company that is, if you embrace, best practices in privacy, security, how you bring in Gen AI, all of that. And so, because your customers need to be feeling comfortable with what you're doing as a company.
Yeah, that completely makes sense. And honestly, I think people don't realize the internet is not that old. It's pretty young. So I wouldn't say you're aging yourself there. I would say it's very fair. It's very young.
Well, let's just say in 2006, when I went in-house, that for the first time, it was really a much more, it was just starting to emerge as the tool that we were all using, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
I think the first iPhone, I had the first iPhone that was ever, put out, and I think it was in 2007 that I got an iPhone.
That sounds right.
So
I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's just a testament to how cool, and how rapidly technology has been changing and has been disrupting so many different industries, right? It's not just one industry it disrupts, it's pretty much everything. And so I would love to understand, in a similar vein, right? How has your perspective on law and policy related to law changed now that you've served as a global privacy officer? How has the international landscape informed the way that you make legal decisions now?
This is a really good question, because I personally feel that lawyers inside of companies, especially inside of companies, really have a duty to be the stewards of good privacy and data protection standards. And because we don't have that many laws, well, we're starting to get more laws in the U.S., but not federal laws that protect all of our privacy. We have sector-specific laws in the U.S. that protect different parts of our privacy at this point. But because this area is changing so rapidly, and companies, use data as if it's gold, because it is gold, pretty much. I think companies have the biggest duty right now to make sure that we're complying with all of these various different privacy protections, and that we're really good citizens, really, in how we take in people's data, how we process it, how we protect it. These are all things that are really important to me as a person as well as a lawyer, because, I don't want my data to be taken in by companies willy-nilly without me knowing what they're doing with it either. So it is definitely something that I feel that we have, we as company, especially as lawyers working inside of companies, have the duty to make sure that our companies are doing the right thing.
Yeah, that completely makes sense. Do you have a specific country or a specific, international body that seems to do a really good job and seems to always be a leader for best practices when it comes to data privacy or ethics?
Yeah, well, I will say that the EU, which is not a specific country but a region, has always been on the forefront of data privacy
I was thinking
protection.
About the EU.
Yeah. And so they have had comprehensive privacy laws in effect for a very long time, even before the general data privacy protection came into GDPR, is what we call it, came into effect there. Because they already had privacy laws in effect that were not as comprehensive, but they were pretty strict even before GDPR. The thing about GDPR is what GDPR came in, when that came in, and that was I'm trying to remember when it got passed, 2018, 2016, something like 2018, I think. What was important at that particular time was that all of the countries in the EU were going to be compliant with this new data privacy law. So that was a sea change in how in how privacy was really, understood, and all of the companies in the world that wanted to do business with any other companies that were in the EU had to comply with all of those laws. So I will say that the EU has always been on the forefront, and they now have an AI law as well. The U.S. is trying, but we're not there yet, and we don't have a federal privacy law either, not a comprehensive federal privacy law. But there are many other countries around the globe, that have comprehensive privacy laws now. India just passed one, China has one, Brazil has one, they're popping up all over, Thailand. And when I was working for a global company, my company right now is really U.S.-based with U.S. data. But global companies, it's difficult to do business globally because there are so many different types of privacy laws that are in effect, and security laws all over the world. So it makes it difficult.
It's very interesting. I'm excited to hear and see, what is going to happen when it comes to the global and international landscape, as pretty much everything is becoming global, right? I want to get your general counsel for the general public. I would love to hear your perspective and advice for people that are interested in protecting their data. But also, data is how companies now do personalization and how they reach potential clients or customers or however that works. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on how you would recommend people navigating their day-to-day and balancing their own data privacy, but also, reaping the benefits of the new technologies that exist.
So from my perspective, I think you need to educate yourself on how to opt out of various different, databases that are out there. We actually have a fair amount of people that opt out of our company's database on a daily basis. But you as a consumer can go to various different websites and figure out how to opt out of, different companies collecting your data. And one of the ways to do that is to go to some of the advertising URLs out there, and you can actually opt out of digital advertising as well. I think it's the National Association for Advertising, NIA, and a few other ones that have general websites where you can actually go and opt out of advertising. And the amazing thing about that is it makes sure if you do that, then you won't get tracked every time you're on, any kind of site, and then you start getting all of that advertising because you happen to be there looking at something that they're tracking, that those companies are tracking. So there's that, and there's a general, so there are such things as data brokers, which is our company is actually a data broker. We collect data from various different sources, but maybe not directly from the consumer. Mm-hmm. And there are now states in the U.S. that have data broker registries, so you can actually go onto a data broker registry in California, Vermont, and I think Texas and Oregon have them right now too. And you can actually go and see who the data brokers are, and you could spend some time trying to figure out how to opt your data out, or possibly see if they have your data. It takes a while, and there are new. Right, especially California is on the forefront in the U.S., by the way, on the data privacy side. They're trying to find new ways to help consumers to figure out how to opt out of some of these data broker companies that are collecting their data. And I think in the beginning of 2026, they have a Data Delete Act that's going into effect that you can actually go to that data broker site and put your name in there, and all of the data brokers that are registered there have to opt you out, so you don't have to spend all that time trying to. So they're trying to make, find different ways to make it easier for consumers to opt out of big data companies, and we call it big data. Trying to collect right. Your data. But I will also say this: there are some good uses for big data out there, and I would say I think that about 50% or more of the companies out there are using data that either they've collected or they're getting through third parties, and not always for bad purposes, but also for for different products that people actually really could find useful. Like, for example, our product, you know what I mean? I mean, people are always trying to prospect and market to people. How do you do that in a way that is, that is correct and in compliance with the law? So that's, so those are some of the things I think that people need to think about when they're thinking about opting out as well. But I will say this: I think that people don't understand that there are actually way more ways to opt out of various different, databases than they really think there is, especially from digital advertising.
Yeah, I didn't know that, so I'm gonna go and see what I can opt out of. That's such great advice. I really appreciate that. I want to talk about the future really quickly.
Yeah.
What do you envision as being the future of, and this is a very broad question, but what do you envision as being the future of data privacy, especially now that, we're seeing the rise of generative AI, and then we're seeing more and more, digital advertising leveraging data, using micro-segmented personalization. Would love to hear your perspective on that.
Yeah, so honestly, I would love for there to be a federal law in the U.S. on on privacy and Gen AI, because it would give us all a better roadmap for making sure that we're all compliant with the same things. Because what's happening now is that 50 states in the U.S. are going to be, passing their own individual comprehensive privacy laws. We already have 50 states in the U.S. with their own cybersecurity laws. And then it looks like we're going down the road that we're going to have 50 states with Gen AI laws, because there are some states that have already implemented some, like Colorado and Utah. And then we have biometric privacy acts that have been passed. Illinois specifically has one. So there's this patchwork of data privacy, data security, Gen AI law out there. And it's really difficult for small and medium-sized companies, even for the bigger companies, to be able to comply with it all and keep up with it. So I really do think we're going to get to sort of a breaking point where if we don't have federal legislation, it's really going to hurt us as a country, this country specifically, to be able to do business with other countries, you know what I mean? Because you can't really think that, an Indian company or even a company in the EU is going to know all the ins and outs of every 50 states of the U.S. So So my hope, it's my hope and my vision that we will have some federal privacy law and federal Gen AI law that can really guide us through the next, I would say decade, really. But unfortunately, some of those laws are really subject to political issues, and we've not had a Congress that could act too easily in the last, 5 to 10 years. So I'm hoping that there's going to be some unity on privacy and security law going forward.
I completely agree with you. Let's all hope for bipartisan initiatives when it comes to data privacy and security.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And in my last question, along the vein of the future, what advice do you have for students that are interested in a career in data privacy, tech law, all of the above at that intersection?
Well, the first thing I'll tell anybody who's interested in it, you don't have to be a lawyer to have a career in data privacy. There are many non-lawyers that are working on the privacy side, on the privacy compliance side. So because we have all these privacy laws, we have to actually have programs within companies to actually implement those privacy laws. So because of that, we need a lot of people that will help to implement. And those are not just lawyers. Those are people that are working, cross-sectionally with all the teams within your company to make sure that, everybody's doing the right thing. Are they filling out their data protection forms? Are they, making sure that the various security programs are running smoothly in your company. So there are many non-lawyers that are already working in that capacity, and I've seen a fair amount of paralegals within different companies that have actually started, going into sort of more the compliance side and really working more, because it's a very detail-oriented but also very interesting field, because things are changing all the time. So I will say that first. So you don't have to be a lawyer to work with data privacy and security. You can be working, and to do that, you can actually, there's some certifications out there called the Certified Information Privacy Professional certification and a Certified Information Privacy Manager certification. Those are all available through the International Association for Privacy Professionals. We call it the IAPP. Take a look at the website. There's a wealth of information there. You will never not be employed if you go into privacy at this point. As a lawyer, I would say there are now, in a lot of the law schools, there are a fair amount of privacy-related sort of areas that you could go into. There are courses that are being taught. There are all kinds of privacy initiatives, I think, within the law schools. Like I've had some law students that I've mentored that have come and worked with me inside my company. I've given them part-time jobs so they can see what it is that we're doing, from a privacy perspective. So that's one way as a law student to kind of to get into privacy and technology type of law. And then the other thing I would say is that you just want to become very open-minded and make sure that you keep up with everything that keeps changing. And I actually think this particular generation of students that are coming through school now that are, thinking about college and going to law school, they have so much more tech knowledge really than we used to. So use it, take it, and you can make a career out of it. You definitely can. And if you're interested in it, it's the intersection of where compliance and law and technology meet is super interesting. And if you're doing anything that's technology related anyway, you're going to need to know about the compliance pieces that go along with that. So I think this is really, the booming area of employment for both lawyers and non-lawyers, to tell you the truth.
Well, that's amazing to hear. Well, thank you so much for coming onto the podcast and talking about what it is that you do, your background, your interests, and your vision for the future. I definitely learned so much, and immediately after this, I'm going to start opting out. I'm going to go to all of the websites to opt out. But thank you so much for sharing. I think that we have some really a really bright future with the students that are interested in this intersection.
Yeah, and if anyone's interested in talking to me some more, I'm happy to talk to anybody anytime about where I came from and all of that. So
That's so sweet. That's amazing. Well, thank you. Thank you so much for coming on. And to our listeners, thank you for joining us, and we will see you next week with a new episode. Bye, all.
Thank you so much for having me.